On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Ezi Odozor, Dr. Njoki Wane, and Dr. Janelle Brady. Ezi Odozor is a Nigerian Canadian writer, higher education professional, and anti-racist practitioner weaving narratives of identity, culture, gender, race, health, and intimacy. Her words find a home in publications like Room Magazine and Arc Poetry Magazine. She is co-editor of the book Cartographies of Blackness and Indigeneities and a co-editor of the 4-part series In Our Own Words, published in 2026 by Women's Press, an imprint of Canadian scholars. Ezi holds a Master's of Education from the University of Toronto, where her research explored the radical possibilities of global health through a Black feminist lens. She also holds a Master's of Science in Psychology from the University of East London, where her work explored the notion of love in the lives of Black women. Beyond the page and the university, Ezi works with organizations and individuals on projects ranging from developing artistic exhibition texts and securing funding for artist spaces to developing anti-racist educational content, including her work with CBC Kids and the City of Toronto. She also finds joy in reading, music, exercise, and the laughter of the children in her life who call her Auntie Ezi. Dr. Njoki Wane is a professor at the University of Toronto at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. She's an accomplished educator, author, researcher, and educational leader. She was the chair of social justice education from 2018 to 2024. She was special advisor to 2 vice presidents, human resources and equity at the University of Toronto. Her specializations include, but are not limited to, Black Canadian feminisms, Black studies in education, African spirituality, African indigenous knowledges, anti-colonial thought, decolonial studies. An award-winning teacher, Professor Wane has been a recipient of many awards, the most recent ones in 2025, Afro Shusha Award, and in 2024, Renaissance Award, Afro Global Television, Academic Excellence Award, Edo Language Day Worldwide, and in 2023, the Legend Award from the University of Toronto alumni, Black History Champion and Leadership Excellence Award, presented by CETI, HHS, NICS, and SC, all community organizations, awarded by Junction Community Organization, Excellence Award in Community Engagement in Toronto, the Gown, African Scholars Award, African Alumni Association at the University of Toronto, the President of Toronto Teaching Award. She has well-published, including 23 books co-edited and single-authored, with her most recent edited book being Education, Colonial Sickness, Anti-Colonial African Indigenous Project. Her forthcoming books are Black Canadian Principles of Feminist Theorizing, Historical Spirals of Spiritual Healing, African Queens Leadership from Pre-Colonial Times, Restoration, Recognition, and Reclamation, Womanisms, Decolonizing Feminisms, and the Dialects of Black Women's Experiences, Toil for Laughter, Black Women in Work, In My Sister's House, Black Feminisms in Canada and Beyond, and Sometimes There Are Tears, Black Women in Wellness, At the Helm, Black Women in Leadership. Dr. Janelle Brady is an award-winning Black Studies scholar, author, and activist researcher. As an assistant professor, she teaches courses on equity, Black childhoods, and social justice pedagogies, with research focused on Black mothering, Blackness in early childhood studies, and Black feminisms. Her scholarship appears in Bloomberg's Publishing, Springer, Sage Publications, Demeter Press, the Journal of Canadian Studies, and University of Toronto Press. She has received honors, including the 2025 Provost Award for Teaching Excellence and the 2022 Viola Desmond Faculty Award from Toronto Metropolitan University, along with the 2021 Emerging Leader Award and the 2019 International Day for the End of Racial Discrimination Award from the University of Toronto. Dr. Brady is the co-founder and director of the Downs View Advocate, a community newspaper in Toronto's North End. She has served as president of the Ontario New Democratic Party since 2022 and previously sat on the provincial executive for several years. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Njoki Wane, Dr. Janelle Brady, and Ezi Odozor about Black studies as well as their book series. So Ezi is a Nigerian Canadian writer, higher education professional, and anti-racist practitioner who weaves narratives of identity, culture, gender, race, health, and intimacy. Dr. Wane is professor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education in the Department of Social Justice Education at the University of Toronto. And Dr. Brady is an assistant professor of the School of Early Childhood Studies at Toronto Metropolitan University. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
So I know we are all in different time zones, so I do not want to take up too much of your time. I'm going to start with how you got into doing the work of Black Studies. You all are co-editing a series on Black womanhood in Canada, in our own words, Black Women and Being. So you have this book series that you've co-edited or co-editing as from a Black feminist perspective. If you could speak to what drew you to this type of work and why you feel that this is important, that would be great.
I think we should get Professor Wan to go first because she's the one who began it all for all of us. So we'll start where it started.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ezi. I'll start by saying that the collection of the books, because I think it's important to give that acknowledgement, was an idea of Janelle and Ezi when they were my students. And when they came up with the 4 series of books, I said, wow, this is brilliant. And we started working on that. And I just want to say thank you to both of you, because of you, we are here today. You have put a lot of work in it, and I truly, truly appreciate you. And Ashe, asante sana. In terms of how we, like for instance, I got into all this, I would say there are multiple entries to this. Number one, I would say because I am from Kenya and I came to Canada for studies, it was by fluke because for me, I just wanted more education. I thought I'll get everything that I missed in Kenya. And coming to Canada, it was a shock, if I can say that. So I started asking questions about the Black students' education because I was at the University of New Brunswick, and there were very few Black people. And when I asked questions, where are the Black people? Where are the Black students? As you know, and I remember a professor telling me, don't ask too many questions. So my entry points were Black education for Black children, Black women's experiences. I kept asking, what about the experiences of the Black people, the Black women who came here through the slave ship? And then, of course, I was also very keen because after New Brunswick, I went to Nova Scotia about the Black women's experiences. I'll give you a few examples. Like I was very keen on the work of Mary Ann Shad Carey, who started the first newspaper, a co-founder of the newspaper, Provincial Freeman newspaper, and also the Colored Women Club of Montreal, the Congress of Black Women, and and also the Black Women's Collective. So I was intrigued that I was reading things, I was reading material, but there was nothing on Black people. It took me quite a bit of time to make sense of what was happening. And when I moved to Toronto, I went straight to the point. I confronted the professors when I was doing my PhD, and I said, this doesn't make sense. I came all this way from Africa to learn more about, Black people, Black women, Black, education for our children. And I remember the professor saying, I think you're in the wrong class. I think you should find your own space. And I remember making up my mind at that time, I have to have a pathway to find out about Black experiences. And that's what I began. Before I did first, I thought I'll go and do research about Black, African women's, rural women's experiences in knowledge production. And when I came back and I got a job at U of T, I had to create a space. Hence the reason why I created Black Feminist Thought course, which was the first one in almost 200 years. And then, of course, there was a lot of backlash. Why are you starting a Black feminist course? We have nothing to do with Black feminisms. Black feminisms, we have enough from the US and so on and so forth. But I did not get silenced. After I started teaching the course, because I was using a lot of US material, I thought we need to create material from the Canadian perspective. So I applied for a grant, and I got a grant to interview Black women in Canada, across Canada. And as a result of that, I gathered a lot of information about Black women's experiences across Canada. And out of that, I was able to situate now myself. I was more comfortable because I was on familiar grounds. And after that, I started, gathering women every Saturday, once a month, not every Saturday, once a month, to bring Black women in Toronto, from Toronto, to talk about Black women's issues. And I remember, Senena Kanda, who is quite a famous Black woman, she's in her 80s now, welcoming me and saying, feel at home. And that was literally my entry point to Black studies. And I can say more and more and more, because from there, I expanded the field into various branches, which I'll talk about it in terms of Black spirituality, Black boys, where are the Black boys, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I can talk the whole hour on my multiple entry points into Black studies, because Black studies is not one monolithic point. It's the diversity of Black studies, the diversity of the people involved, the areas, the disciplines, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Brady, would you like to respond?
Sure, I'll jump in. So thank you so much for that acknowledgement, Professor Wan. Um, you know, taking that course was a turning point for me, the Black Feminist Thought course during my doctoral studies. And that's what provided me with more of a sharpened focus on Black feminist thought and the intersection of race and gender and class coming together. And that really took me on a different pathway for my research, or kind of fine-tuned my research. So my entry point into Black studies started with my experience with educational system navigation. So there's quite a bit of anti-Black racism. It's part of the system, the education and schooling system here in Canada. So a lot of Canadian education scholars speak about that as well as not being only unique to the United States. It's global, right? So um, when I got to university, I struggled in my first year. And I was the first in my family to attend university at Canadian post-secondary. So I thought, what's a way of giving back? Friends of mine and we thought, what's a way of giving back, passing on knowledge, when we started to figure things out, that it's not just about showing up to class, doing the homework, and going home. There's the extracurriculars, there's the office hours of your faculty members, there's all these hidden pieces. So when I was in undergrad, I started a nonprofit organization, which ran for close to 10 years after I graduated as well. And it was providing mentorship for youth in the Jane Finch community, which is a neighborhood that I grew up in most of my life because I moved around quite a bit. Um, and it offered after school programming. We connected high school students. It's a suburb community of Toronto, considered racially diverse. It has a lot of stigma as well in terms of quote unquote crime and safety and that. But it's a very flourishing neighborhood with a lot of uh, community resiliency of people coming together, starting community gardens, organizations. So my organization that I had initiated, not just mine, but that organization was not unique because there were many. But through that running that programming and connecting high school students with post-secondary mentors in my network and friends of mine, our networks, we started to see that a lot of the students were picking pathways that were quite racialized. So, for instance, Black girls in particular, they were choosing social work, which is perfectly fine. But when you query them a little bit more, they would say, well, I'm taking social work. I'm planning on taking social work at the college level. So here we have college and university, so like community college, which is perfectly fine as well. But then when you probe a little bit more, they would say that they're were told by guidance counselors that it would be the easier route. So they had the right credits to go to university, but they were being steered in a particular direction. And that was my experience as well. So flash forward to that led me to academia to kind of research this more, this issue of streaming, educational streaming, and understand what was the work that people have done before on this particular matter. Um, and that's what led me to sorry, doctoral studies. And in the doctoral studies, in taking the Black feminist thought course, that's where we were having those deep discussions around the advocacy of Black mothers as tradition for Black communities, and mothering not just being for, oneself or your direct family, but for wider community. And 1 year before starting the program, the PhD program, I had lost my mom. So I was doing a lot of deep reflection with that grief and mourning. And I knew this, but through the course, I had the theoretical backing to understand that had it not been for my mother's advocacy, I wouldn't have even gone to university, because at every stage she was there. She kind of understood the school system because she went through it herself, and she came to Canada from Jamaica at the age of 5. So my grandmother went through that. And then my mother was able to pass those lessons to our neighbors, her friends, and do that advocacy for um, anybody and everybody. In doing that, I was also doing a research project with one of the school boards, one of the large school boards here in Ontario, in this province. And time again, it was on anti-Black racism and the experiences of boys, um, what it means for them to do well and be quote unquote engaged, and what it means for them to be disengaged. And we found that it doesn't matter if Black boys are quote unquote doing well academically or not, or quote unquote engaged or disengaged. What we found was that they still faced anti-Black racism and systemic oppression at every turn. And what struck me was when they would say, um, my mom is my number one advocate. Or they joke, and if we had focus groups, they would joke and say, oh no, when my mom comes to the school, it's over. Like, they would be embarrassed and things like that. And this was meanwhile I was taking that course that Dr. Wan had initiated. So that really led me on a trajectory to look at the unique experiences of Black women in Canada, and how, migration pathways, how navigating different systems, especially the schooling and education system, kind of all come together. And that's what led me to Black studies in a nutshell. There's more, but I would also say that working alongside Ezi in, running a large scale anti-racism conference at the university really opened my eyes to a lot of the different theories, a lot of the research that's out there, as well as practitioners who are doing that deep and meaningful work, even though it's very difficult in whatever context that they're in, to address anti-Black racism. But it also reminded me of community, and the community that Ezi and we were able to build with other students and other folks at the time, and still maintain through this day. I feel like that's what fuels the important work that needs to be done. And Professor Wan just mentioned, the Congress of Black Women and all of these groups. through these groups, folks were able to and continue to find that community as well. So that's something that's always been front of mind for me too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. I mean, I'll add to that in the sense that I think the way that I came into this is I've always been really interested in people and in stories. And so when I came to university, one of the biggest problems that I think my family and my friends said are, "What are you going to do? Because you want to do everything." I'm a person who likes to be in the arts and in professional services and in all these other places. And so, how do those things connect? In university, one of the things that tries to get told to us is we have to do one thing, as if we're one stream people, and that's not really how life works. So when I came into university, I did both humanities, but I also did sciences. And so then how do you connect all those things? So how do I connect my love of stories and thinking about tradition and thinking about folklore and all those things with a love of also sciences in terms of human biology, which is the other side of things that I did. And so this thing came along called global health, where people were like, "Oh, that's the people side of the science," and you can talk about how to really help people. And you go through this thing, and throughout, I was saying, well, what are the stories that are being told about people in this thing where we're supposed to be talking about helping people? Who are these people that need our help? Why do they always look like a particular thing? Why is it always said that this one group can save this other group without reflecting on what this group did to destabilize the group that they're now saying they want to save? And so at the same time, also doing, an English degree at the same time as doing that global health degree. And so thinking about the stories that we tell, so what we write about, but then the stories that get produced through how we live and what we experience. So narrative not just being the thing that is on the page or even in oral tradition, but the thing that we experience. And so when I did my undergrad, I ended up finishing with global health, and then I said, okay, let me do this master's thing, but I don't necessarily want to do it purely in global health because by the end of having done all this global health, I don't believe in what you're talking about. Um, and so the space where I was able to really explore that was doing a master's at OISE, so the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. And that is where I had the pleasure of being taught by Professor Wane and being supported as peer and a mentor by Professor Brady. So I love calling her Professor Brady now, the latest in the bunch. Um, so it's that environment that allowed me to really explore those questions, to connect a love of people, a love of narrative, and a love of challenging what we decide to say about people and how we think about people. And I think that Black feminist thought course, if we were really talking about locating that in Black studies, really gave a way of thinking about ways of knowing. So that was one of the biggest takeaways I had from that course is that, okay, I'm thinking about how do we talk about people and we're saying that global health means this thing and health means this one thing, but I know my grandma talks about health in a different way, and I know she knows what she's talking about. She might not, my grandma is also a nurse, it just so happens, but then she mixes some of that formal training with an understanding of you can deliver something formal in terms of a medicine or whatever, but it also matters in the way that we relate to people in terms of how they actually experience care. Right? And so ways of knowing can mean so many things to us. And they're produced from different centers that are all valid, that have created the world that we experience now, that make real the things that we say are from science, but which totally founded and right and correct. But then that only becomes real and usable in people's lives in the way that those things become socialized. And so, what do different ways of knowing produce, both in a traditional context, but also in a contemporary sense, that can help us make the world better? So, I think that course really grounded me in thinking about that from those theoretical perspectives that I was otherwise doing in other ways, but then allowed me to have a grounding to be able to say, okay, this is what we were talking about. And now I can apply this knowing that other people have also produced, and this, I think, environment as well, because the knowledge that you get from a new setting is one thing, but the environment that allows you to work with that knowledge, challenge that knowledge, think about one thing Professor Wan would always say when we had a reading was, how do you know that that thing is true? So think about why it is that that person is saying that thing. Who is it that's producing that knowledge? Why do they think that it's their time to share this piece of information? So challenging also in that environment what it is that we're being told to believe, adopt, use further. So even though our professor was presenting this as something that we're supposed to be using, she was also inviting challenge to say, tell me something about what I've told you here today. So I think the knowledge itself was important, but the environment was critical to then shape a forward interest in how I take that forward either academically or in my case, using that in terms of professional service environments as well.
Yes. Thank you. I actually want to follow up on what you said, Ezzy, to going into the next question that I have, with regards to how you all situate yourself in relationship to the multiple fields and disciplines that your work crosses, because you are on the admin side, right? How do you see this? How do you see Black feminism and Black studies? How do you see that playing out in the work that you do administratively in higher education spaces?
Yeah, so I'm still a busybody, so I do a bunch of different things. And I'm happy that it turned out that way, so that I stayed true to who I was to now. So I think that I know that I work in higher education spaces. So currently I'm a director of student life at a university in Birmingham in the UK. And what that looks like day to day is thinking about how do my services, so essentially student life equals student services over here. So if I think about the disability department that falls within my directorate, if I think about student funding, if I think about health and well-being, I have to also think about how do these services provide services to a multitude of students? How do we honor what the students are coming with? We don't just offer, for example, counseling because not everybody will respond to talk therapy, right? So you have to think about where people are coming from. You have to think about the position that their life is in, but not just them as an individual, but then how does the society position them in those ways as well? And then how do you deal with that so that they can be successful in the journey that they are trying to go through by joining this university environment? So you have to think about that in terms of the staffing that you do, in terms of the modalities that you encourage, in terms of when you're representing at other boards. So just because I'm in professional services doesn't mean I don't sit on um, academic discussions. So if I'm providing a professional service, what does that mean in terms of the academic environment? How can I contribute or challenge in that environment? So in the UK, it's actually very highly regulated higher education. There's a lot of reports to write, and a lot of things to talk about. So one of the things we talk about is the awarding gap. So I was recently in a conversation where a colleague made the comment that, um, the awarding gap, there's no particular evidence to show that decolonizing the curriculum necessarily closes the awarding gap. But the comment that I made was decolonizing the curriculum is still important, even though it might not show in research to have a direct impact on the awarding gap. Because lest you forget, the awarding gap was renamed the awarding gap because it's about the awarding, not the attainment of the individual. And the awarding has as much to do with the awarder as it does to do with the individual's own achievement. So if we are going to say that decolonizing the curriculum is not important because of this outcome, we also neglect the other ways in which it allows students to thrive. So this outcome has something to do with maybe looking at your awarders. And so decolonizing the curriculum might not change the behavior of the awarders, but it certainly changes the sense of belonging and the well-being, definitely, of the people in the environment. And where well-being is my responsibility, it's my responsibility to make sure that that's still something that we're looking at. Not that I agree with that decolonizing the curriculum doesn't do anything, but if that's the argument you're making, let's not forget the other reasons that it's important.
Thank you. Dr. Wan, would you like to speak to the ways that your work has crossed multiple fields?
Okay. I'll start by saying that, as I had articulated a little bit earlier, I'm very interested in finding out where the gaps are. I was a student in the department that I became a professor. So I was very careful not to duplicate myself, but to complement the work that especially my supervisor was doing. So interest and curiosity to find where the gaps are made me start looking at different disciplines. And what I did was I started by doing an environmental scan. And then environmental scan is what actually brought me to know, to see the gap in terms of the lack of voices of Black, Black people, Black students, Black population in Canada. And then the next thing was to fill the gaps. And in order to fill the gaps, I could not just focus on Black women in the community, Black women within the institution, within the university, Black women in schools. I had to think of how do I connect the different disciplines that University of Toronto, and in particular our department that used to be sociology of equity studies, was very multidisciplinary. So I couldn't fit into education alone. But I was teaching within the teacher ed education. I couldn't fit completely within gender studies that was collaborating with our department. I couldn't fit exactly with history because although I never studied history, I have learned history of the people of Canada and so on and so forth. And so it's a complicated interaction, interweaving of different departments, of different disciplines that brought me to where I am today. And I'll tell you, so when I thought of, the multiple aspects of what I've talked about, I started going to Toronto schools, which was interesting. And I really was able to see the experiences of Black students and what was happening to them. And I started connecting with them. And then, as I indicated, I also started looking at Black women heterogeneity in terms of their experiences, the experiences from women from Africa, from women from the US, from the Caribbean and Canadian and Nova Scotian. And it was at that time that racism hit me hard. Because I from the continent, I didn't think I didn't know anything about racism. But it hit me hard. Why somehow doors were not opening for me, were not opening for other students, why I wasn't getting any scholarships, it's the same old story, why I'll put my hand and somehow I really wanted to tell my story. Why? So that issue of racism, I remember this was in the early 2000s, really, really depressed me. And I thought instead of being depressed, I'll make use of that depression. And I came up with a course on anti-racism for the pre-service, for the teachers, for the students in teaching program, Bachelor of Education at University of Toronto. And so I was able to connect with education that way. And then in terms of connecting with history, I came up with a course called Cultural Knowledges, Representation and Colonial Education, that I wanted to look at the histories of the peoples of the world so that I was not just focusing on Black people. And what I found and what the students found about themselves, about their history, some of them completely changed their way of looking at the world. And then after that, because I'm a soul person, because the cultural knowledges, representation, and colonial education was sort of trying to make them connect with the different aspects of who they are, I decided to look at spirituality. So that's why I say it's so eclectic. And I came up with a course, Spirituality and Schooling. And I remember the first class where students came with mats because they thought we were going to do meditation. And I said, no, we are going to theorize spirituality as a research, spirituality as a theory, spirituality as a tool, because we are talking from the soul. We are talking from our heart to connect all the dots. In addition to that, I'll talk a little bit about that. Again, through curiosity, I came up with a course on women in leadership, because at that time I was the advisor of Vice President, Human Resources and Equity. And I remember asking her, where are the Black people? Where are the Black women in leadership? And she said, Njoki, you asked too many questions. Again, I was asked too many questions. And as a result, because I wanted to have evidence that what I was asking was valid, I put up a research project to look at, Black women in leadership positions in the academy. And at that time, I could only find 23 women across Canada. Last but not least, in terms of connecting the contemporary, and the history and the ancient Africa, I came up with another course, because now I had established some grounding within the Canadian landscape. I thought, let me find out about the history of Black people that was left out. And I came up with a course on Africa, ancient Africa nations. And honestly, when I put that course together, I had 20 students. All of them broke down. I remember it was winter 2020. And instead of the course being 1 year, one semester, I decided to make it a full year course, but I graded them at the end of April. Because students said, why didn't we know this? Why weren't we taught about this? Why weren't we taught? Why was, they came before Columbus? Why was it not, on our syllabus? Why were we not told that, Black people used to sail from the continent to the Americas? Why were we not taught about that? And the outcome of that was Colonial Sickness, a book that came out in 2023. And so it's not like a straight way of connecting with this discipline, I've interweaved the whole thing together, from history to the contemporary, to Canada, to Africa, to Jamaica, the Caribbean, and so on and so forth in terms of my research and my writing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It really echoes a lot of other scholars who have been on, who've talked about how it's the questions, what they're curious about, that drives how they explore the different aspects and facets of Black life and history and culture. Thank you. Dr. Brady?
Yeah, very similarly, and it's interesting that you mentioned that that's the that's a common thread for other Black studies scholars as well, because my initial starting point was sociology. That was my first degree, right? And I loved sociology because it gave me a lens into understanding systems and how my individual problem, is not just my problem, like as he had mentioned, but it's connected to a wider system, and what's happening structurally is what we need to perhaps look more deeply at. So in system navigation in the education settings, really having that background and understanding that, my experience is connected to the experiences of students who I don't know, to students who have come before me, and students who are in the system right now. Um, which also led me to education because of my community-based experience of doing community research, community work, frontline work, at looking specifically at the schooling system and racism in schools and those pieces. So that led me to education. And then I went more into like a family's approach with the mothering lens, but in particular, Black mothering perspectives. So what are the unique practices of Black mothers in past, in present, and how does that ground Black children, Black families, and Black communities, and how does that help us reimagine Black futurities through these practices? And then that's what led me then to early childhood studies. So, being a faculty member in early childhood studies, it's not early childhood education, it's studies because it is an interdisciplinary department and program. So there are folks who come with more of a scientific developmental lens, and then there are some of us who come with more of sociological perspective. There are disability scholars in the department, and my work sits within Black studies. So I'm interested in a Black studies focus, anti-racism focus in early childhood education and care, because it's about reclaiming care, work that is largely led by women and gender diverse folks, not relegating that to being work that is not important or not valid. And that's what, in that program, I still have that family's lens, right? So recently I contributed a chapter which will be coming out later on, but, there's this textbook. I have it here. So Canadian Families Today. And I've been using this textbook because it's a pretty, comprehensive book, um, you know, going over all the different experiences of families. I teach a families course there. And what was missing, though, because there's a lot on immigrant families, family dynamics, family formation, was the Black families in Canada experience. So I was invited to write a chapter for the upcoming edition that's coming out on Black families in Canada. So that's an example of how the contributions of Black scholars across interdisciplinary spaces can help support everyone. Because what I've had to do over the past couple of years is kind of piecemeal together. Okay, we don't have a specific chapter for this unit. These are the readings you're going to do. And to the piece on history that Professor Wan mentioned, there's such rich history there. And I've had so many times where students feel robbed of that history, that the richness of Black history. So I feel like sometimes when I'm teaching, I have to start with a whole historical piece on um, Black Canadians, Black families in Canada, before I could even jump into the concepts, right? And I know that's not unique to myself. I know a colleague of mine who is an Indigenous scholar in the department feels like she has to do a lot of front load teaching before she could even get into the concepts. So all just to say the historical piece is something I'm very interested in now. And currently I'm working with Black elders as the third phase of a research project, and looking at the anti-racism initiatives that they led they laid the blueprint for in the Toronto context, which led to a lot of the changes in different legislation in early childhood setting contexts. But people don't know that. My students don't know that. And I'm still investigating and asking those questions as well. So it's definitely not a one size fits all. And I think that's a product of the pieces of modernity, right? Like modernity kind of fits you into those boxes, going back to what Ezi said of like, okay, what are you going to do? What are you going to study? Like, we are like unique people who lead unique and intersectional lives, right? So it's difficult to say you just belong here and stay in your lane. So I think that's a product of that. Well, I know it's a product of that. Even the disciplines is a product of that. The is a product of that as well. And that's why through Black Studies research, we're able to reclaim our knowledge and provide it to a wider audience of learners and folks. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your responses. Um, I do want to be respectful of your time, especially because we're in multiple time zones. So I want to ask about the book series. I know Dr. Wan kind of mentioned how it started. Um, in the first question, but if you all want to speak a little bit more about how that came together, as well as why you think it's so important to have a series that reflects the voices of Black Canadian women.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about how it came to be. So, um, as Professor Wan said, Janelle and I, whilst we were doing about a million other things, we were thinking to ourselves, like, we really want to have this opportunity to have a book or book series. It started actually, I think, Janelle, correct me if I'm wrong, and we were talking about a book. And then we were like, but there's so many other ways to look at this. And I think one of the things that Professor Wan really taught us is importance of community, and like I said before, about multiple ways of knowing. And as somebody who, I really value the academy, but I also value the other spaces that I inhabit in terms of whether that's arts or otherwise, thinking about the academy is important in a lot of different ways, but it's not the only place that people come to know things. And writing an essay or a chapter is not the only way in which we can express information. Um, so, I was really keen on it being something that doesn't just contain research articles or research-based chapters type things, or even theory, but also just art. Let art explain a particular point to somebody, or let a poem do that. And then, I was thinking, and then Janelle and I were talking and thinking about, okay, well, what are some of the other ways that we can conceptualize these chapters? And so Janelle started saying things like, oh, like, work and mothering as work. And then, we rushed into Professor Wan's office and we're kind of like, we have this idea. And being the wonderful mentor that she always is, super open to hearing that idea and was like, let's make this real. And this is who I know. And this is how we do that. And so I think like I said before about environment. So I think Professor Wan creates a particular environment that all that stuff is possible. So it wasn't like, oh, that's too much, chill. There's one book is enough. She was like, how do we make this happen? And then just through us working together and having that relationship, we were able to build out something and invite other people. And I think that's really speaking to why we called the series what it's called, because it's in words of our own. And so it's not about, we keep emphasizing this heterogeneity in terms of perspective, in terms of who contribute to the book, in terms of how many years of experience they have, whether or not they're from the academy. Like, it's all of these things that are coming together to say, it's not permission to speak, but it's just an invitation for all of us to start thinking about our own experience in our own words, agree or disagree, have a different perspective or not. All of that has home here. So I think that's kind of how this started and how we hope it's going for everybody as well.
Can I just say, when they came to my office, both Ezi and Janelle, after they talked of the idea of the 4 books, they do not know, and I can say today how excited I was, because what I saw was a tapestry of space, the space for Black women to articulate their narratives, to raise their voices, to write, to document about their voices, hence in my sister's house. The other thing was, in that sister's house, that space, there are a lot of tears. There are a lot of, sharing. And for me, I thought this would be an opportunity for us to cry together, for us to as we cry together, to look back into our history and start healing ourselves. Hence the notion of women, Black women and wellness. And in that book, I've written about the question of healing, because I teach a course on indigenous healing and so on and so forth. So that was another aspect of it. In addition to that, there were like 4 circles that connected together, but I did not tell them at that time. The notion of toil. Black women, whether it's, in the history of enslavement to today, we toil. But in the process of toiling, there is a lot of laughter. That's how we were able to survive enslavement. Because the day we were off, we'll be dancing, we'll be having our local brew and so on and so forth. And to wind it all, at the helm, Black women in leadership. I For me, at that time, I said to myself, do you know Black women have always been in leadership, but not necessarily in, you know, in formal institutions, but we have always led. We have always led. And I said, whoa, these young people, they are brilliant. They have brought together something that I cannot say no. So I'm just telling you what pulled me, because this was an opportunity, a platform for us to be able to intersect the four circles of our lives. Yeah.
And if I can also add to, Professor One did a lot of work in, and continues to, in Black Canadian feminist thought, in laying the foundation for that as a theory, a perspective, and a lens, which is unique to the Canadian experience of Black women. And that's stemming from, that's stemming from your work, Professor, over the years. And you had also said to us in that meeting that there's a gap, right? In terms of um, prior work that you did and the theorizing that needs to happen today and that day, right? So that was also something that we thought was important to contribute and to add to that foundational work that Professor Wan has established in Canada. Yeah.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing how that came together. That's amazing. I did not know when I initially emailed you that this came together because you took a class with Dr. One, and then she supported this idea to bring together voices of many Black women on different areas and aspects of their lives. So that's phenomenal. I want to ask, final question, where you all think Black studies, and in particular, Black Canadian feminist studies, should go moving forward. And Dr. Wan, if you would like to start.
The future of Black studies has endless possibilities. That's one thing, because as you can see from the collection of the 4 books, there is so much we have done, and there is so much that needs to be done. So I see a space within that endless possibilities, a creation of what I call African Black village. And within that village, Black African village or African Black village, it will not just be a collection of houses, homes, but it will be a collection, because now we are having the Gen Zs, we are having different generations. It will be a collection of values, norms, not norms from the ancient Africa, but norms that are speaking to the ideals, to the notion of the generation that we are facing today. It will be, as I say, within that endless possibilities of creating a community of like-minded people that has commitment, that is collaborative, that has collegiality. And it will mean that at some point in future, we'll have that aha moment. I've left the plantation. I am out of the plantation. I'm no longer mentally colonized. I'm no longer spiritually colonized. I am whole. So there is a space, there is a future that is really bright for Black studies. And in particular, if you're not just doing Black studies for the sake of doing Black studies, for the sake of a salary, but for a commitment to unmask, to excavate the hidden histories, a commitment to document what has been left out in our educational books, a commitment to speak out when no one is speaking out about the lives and the experiences of Black people in Canada and globally.
Ezi, would you like to add?
Sure. I mean, I think I'll add from the perspective of, again, looking at the application of study. So I think when I think about the academy, I think about it in terms of what does it look like to consider something beyond the classroom? So in the spaces, in the co-curricular spaces and extracurricular spaces, in terms of support and in terms of the environment that we create. And I think Black studies contributes to that in the sense that, yes, it foregrounds itself in a study of Blackness, but also we can refract through the lens of the Black experience what that means for our collective experience. And so if we think about the ways in which certain people experience the world and what we can do to improve the world for that experience, what does that mean then for other people? So, in terms of a professional services space, as a Black woman, I'm one of few Black women in leadership at my organization, and generally speaking, at any organization that I'm in. So if we think about improving leadership experience for Black women, what does that also do collectively? So I think Black studies is a space of possibility, not only in terms of production, knowledge production within the academy, but in reshaping the academy and its purpose more broadly. So one of the big questions we're constantly thinking about in terms of higher education now is what is the purpose of higher education for Gen Alpha and beyond? Right? So even beyond Gen Z, there's this thing called Gen Alpha. They're in high school, elementary school now. And so in a world where there's AI, in a world where there's fewer enrollments in university, what does reshaping the university look like? And if we harken back to kind of what we talked about in terms of other ways of knowing, how do we build an academy that is actually situated or localized in people's experience rather than an academy that is known for, whether or not that's what we all do, but is known for dictating a particular worldview to people and asking them to accept that and then roll out whatever they roll out in line with that. But what does it look like if we have an academy that considers the modern family, right? And it says, what can we contribute or change, or how do we shape ourselves to provide you in a way to make your family experience better, or to make the experience of multiple families better? So I think it's both in terms of Black Studies has a lot to contribute in terms of the way we think about the space of the academy and people's different entry points and positions in it, and how if we make one thing better for one group, it can make things better for other groups. But also in terms of Black Studies repositions our thinking about the world. And if we start to engage some of the principles about our thinking of the world into what even the academy is in this modern age, that too can contribute to maybe even the survival, we call it that, of higher education, because it is at risk in terms, and we see that every day in terms of universities reducing courses, often humanities courses such as Black Studies, right? And all those kinds of things. So I think in terms of how people exist within the space, but also in terms of how we think about the space, adopting some of the principles from this discipline can be helpful.
Dr. Brady?
Yeah, I'll quickly share a note I received from a student. So one of the advice that I received from Professor Wane was to, in starting in a faculty position, is to initiate a course and to be intentional about the course that I create. And as you could see, I'm following a long tradition of creating a number of very impactful courses, right? So I initiated one course within a couple of years of starting in that position, and it's called Black Childhoods in Canada, and it's seems to be one of the first of its kind in Canada as well, really looking at the Black childhood experience. And one of the disciplinary pieces I didn't mention earlier was a childhood studies perspective, where there's a sociology of childhood where it's pushing back against the idea that children are becoming rather than being, and it's honoring and respecting children where they are. So if we kind of draw on those Black studies principles, those African Indigenous principles, where it's ICU, like Sawubona, Afrocentric principles, then, there would be better outcomes for Black children, Black families, and Black communities. So I received a letter from a little sticky note from one of the students, and I'd say more than 50% of the students do go on to teacher education after doing the early childhood studies program. And the student, a Black student, she written, this course allowed me to do a lot of reflection on my personal experiences and was very healing, with a little heart. Thank you for all the work you do and creating a space for Black ECE students. And see you at grad. So as heartening as it was to receive that note, and over the past couple of years to receive many other notes like that from students who have taken this course, this is in their 4th year at the end of the program. And it's usually in the last semester. And it's an optional course. Like, that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But that was also by my choice in the beginning, right? I would like to see, for Black studies, a future where it doesn't take that long for Black students to feel affirmed, to feel seen, to feel understood, and to feel represented. I would love to see in future Black studies, and there's a lot right now around pro-Black approaches and pro-Black pedagogies in early childhood studies by scholars like Gloria Boutte and Dr. Carrie-Anne Iskai, who would have also been taught by Professor Wane as well. There's a lot of work that's happening, but it is met with quite a bit of resistance, of course, just like anything else. So, I'd like to see in future, and my hope is that it doesn't take that long for Black students to feel that way and to be in spaces that, the environments that Ezi and I benefited from, that they could benefit from those environments earlier on and all throughout their life as well. That's kind of where I'm at, in addition to everything that everyone has already said too. Totally co-sign and agree with everything. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I truly appreciate it. I think it's really important that we do talk about Black studies in contexts outside of the U.S. And Canada is right there. I don't think we know as much about like Canadian Black feminism here as we should. Is there anything anyone would like to add before I give you back the rest of your day?
I think just a little thing is at the end of the books, we were really, we tried to really think about how people would use these books beyond like a classroom environment. So to really engage with thought themselves. So at the end of each of the books, there's these critical questions. So we all love journaling in this day and age. So I think it's a really good way to make the book accessible for different groups of people to be able to think through on their own, something that, like you said, Professor Wan always encourages us to think about what we're reading, right? So really get a chance to think through, okay, what am I seeing here? What am I reading here? What am I experiencing here? And how does that land for me? And what can that inspire in terms of my future journey? That curiosity that Professor Wan talked about earlier is so important for everybody. So I think whatever people read, it's not that this is what it is. This is not, therefore, the thing that we stamp and say that's what you must understand, but it's a thing to engage with, to think further for yourself and be critical and inspire new pathways. So those critical questions at the end, I think they're really cool. So if people check them out and interact with them, that's a way of interacting with the book as a living thing that can produce new thought and expand the book and challenge the book. So I think that's something just to point out.
Thank you. I agree. I think those questions are helpful and important. And the books are great. I really enjoyed being able to engage with the books and see similarities and differences in my life and experiences as a Black woman in a slightly different context. So thank you all for your work, and thank you all for your time in speaking with me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of what I'm sure is a very busy summer for all of you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Thanks for having us,
Thank
Ashley.
you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, the two of you. Wow.
Yes.
I'll say this in sort of emotional aspect of it. When I started this journey, I was technically alone. But now I have a community. I have Black women writing. I have Black women teaching Black feminist thought in Canada, in various universities in Canada. I am so proud of what I see, what my words in a classroom that is only 3 months what it has produced. I'm so proud of what Ezi is doing, because being a teacher, Ezi, is not necessarily being in a classroom. You are a teacher, and I've seen you grow. I've seen you, I've seen you, do so much for the community. My goodness. My ancestors told me stop, so I'll stop. I'll speak now. And the ancestors sort of guide you. So thank you. Ashe. Thank you. Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you, Asante Sana. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.